Hello and welcome. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm joined by Luis Scott Vargas. There we are. We are super excited to be here for Vintage Super League. It's week 4, and that means new deck lists. What is everybody going to be playing, Luis? Have you got this figured out?
I sure hope so. I mean, I know what I'm playing, barely, but
Sure.
I, it's really fun. New deck lists are fun for basically everyone. I know they're fun as a viewer. Like I like just watching other people's matches, even the ones I'm not involved in.
Yeah.
They're fun to play when you don't have full information, and they're really fun to metagame. Like you have to not only look at the two people you're playing, but you have to look at the people they're playing to see what they each person might reasonably expect. And you can also look at historically what the people you're facing have played in the past, and so on and so forth. It's pretty fun. I think it's really interesting to see, like, and this is something we've brought up before. Everyone's range seems to have gotten wider. There's no one you would put on one deck, and there's very few people you'd even put on two decks. Almost everyone could just play. They can show up playing, Storm or Workshops or Delver or anything like on that spectrum.
We had to develop that range because of exactly what you're talking about. Like, if you can get pigeonholed and somebody is building a deck for just 3 opponents, you just get destroyed. Like, oh, you're the guy that can be predicted. Well, you know what? They're going to err on the side of playing the deck that beats you.
And it's especially dangerous if you're in a set with other people who have the same deck tendencies as you, because
Yes.
once you have 2 combo players in your 3 rounds, then it becomes a lot more appealing to play a deck that has a good matchup against combo, or play a deck with a lot of sideboards against combo. So again, there's basically a lot of downsides to playing the same deck over and over again, and not a lot of upsides.
Yeah, now who was your set that you had to metagame against?
So I'm playing against Rich Shea tonight, then Chris Pikula and Bob. So it's challenging because Bob, I think I have him nailed down as the person with the widest range in the entire group, because his
Wow.
range doesn't just include, he's played Workshops. I don't think he's actually played Dredge, but his
No, he
doesn't just
hasn't.
include Workshops, Combo, something like Delver. His list also includes things like Zernorb Crucible Fast One Combo or Thoughtcast Tezzeret. Basically, he's willing to play almost anything, and I've seen him do that. So when I'm building my deck, I'm almost just putting Bob on like some kind of blue deck, some kind of mid-range blue deck, and just going from there. But getting more specifics really difficult.
No, that's right. I hadn't thought of him as the guy with the single widest range, but he definitely is willing to show up with an experiment. So you might just be right. Yeah, David Williams had some of that in his DNA too, when he was a guy we had to metagame against.
Oh yeah, for sure. Whereas, I'm playing against someone like Chris. Chris has played a lot of workshops. He's played more workshops than anyone except maybe David Ochoa, who's so far only played workshops. We've only seen David have to select 2 different decks, and they've just both been workshops.
He is 9-0 though. Like, if you're
Yeah.
9-0 with
Uh,
workshops, do you just run it back?
I mean, we'll
Well,
see. He's
nine and
nine and
one,
one, right?
9-1, but 9 in a row on a
Yeah.
9 game winning streak.
But the thing is, like, I know Webb. Webb's played a ton of Vintage. He's played all the decks in Vintage. He's played Storm. He's played mid range. I don't think that Webb is necessarily ruling out the fact that everyone knows he's 9-0 and with workshops, and has to just decide how much of an impact that is.
It's a great point. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see what he does here. I kind of think it's so easy for people to pigeonhole him on workshops that he would zag off of them. I don't know. You probably know.
I might know what Webb's playing, but obviously I cannot spoil the surprise. All I know is that people have learned their lesson when it comes to just playing the same decks over and over again. Not in a bad way. I mean, a part of it was that we watched the Vintage format evolve. We actually,
Yeah.
we started season 1 in what I consider a very turbulent time in Vintage's history in terms of the metagame, because we started, when we started, Khans of Tarkir wasn't legal, and it became legal midway through the season. So
Right. Right.
you would end up with we eventually saw Treasure Cruise get restricted, then we saw Dig Through Time get restricted, and Vintage changed a lot. I mean, there was a while when you could play for Treasure Cruise where I thought Delver was the best deck hands down, but now we've backed off of that a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking of going back to try to do like how have these archetypes done historically in Vintage Super League, but yeah, the format has changed so much that it's like Monastery Mentor is a terrible deck, obviously. Look how amazing Delver is. It's like, well, there's some things that have happened over the, I guess, years at this point.
Yeah, we've actually been in 3 different calendar years while playing the Super League at this point, which is awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I certainly like promoting vintage and making sure people see it and can enjoy it.
Same. We do apologize for the Skype issues we're having. Obviously, we're doing our best to fix them and try to have cameras that stay consistently on. And I don't know why Skype's misbehaving. Neither does Athena, but hopefully she'll figure it out. Meanwhile, we're just going to keep talking. It sounds like the audio is working fine, so apologies. But you have predictions for this first match? It's Eric Froehlich versus Chris Pikula is our opening match here. And I don't know if you worked with Eric or if you just want to speculate about Chris.
Well,
you have a read on these guys?
You know, I am playing Chris, and I'm just going to say that I thought he was most likely to play shops. I don't think he's a guarantee to play workshops, but
Okay.
I think that like for every person you don't have a guarantee in any way, right? But for every person you put them on a range and you put them on like what are the different percentages, and I have Chris as his most likely percentage of shops. He actually did make a statement earlier this season where he thinks Storm and Shops are the two best decks, and he doesn't have time to figure out Storm, which maybe that's a bit of misdirection. You know, Chris is a wily one, but I would not be surprised if that was just what he thought at the time. You know, especially since you've already turned your deck list. It's like week 1 coverage. You're not really thinking about week 4 at that point. So I could definitely see him playing Shops. Part of what goes into that for me is even though he has played other decks, like he went 2-1 with the Blue Belcher deck, he has consistently done well with shops. You know, I guess they didn't treat him all that well the first round here though, so I could see him backing off that. But he also said he didn't like the aggro shops deck, so I could see him switching to more of a Terra Nova build with like cards like Norod, for example. And if he did, then that would be a reason for that he was switching decks but still playing the card Mishra's Workshop.
Now Eric has been playing Storm historically. I can't put Eric on running it back. I mean, that's Chris's opponent here, especially running it back against Pikula, who I do think I agree with you has to be, I don't know, among the most likely people to show up with shops in any given set. So I don't know. Eric could switch to shops himself. I mean, it is a very good deck. He has played it previously, but his Storm deck has done so well for him. I don't know. I guess I think I have Eric on some sort of something blue. I just think that's he's been playing Storm for a while. If he wants to change, which I kind of suspect that he would, it seems like he would go towards something in the counterspell range.
Eric has played Storm a lot recently, which is one reason that most people I think are assuming that that's not his most likely deck. You can't put Eric on 0% playing Storm because the deck is great and he's done well with it. Those are usually things that make you want to play a deck more. But Eric also is someone who likes metagaming, and I don't know that I don't know that everyone else is going to assume he's on Storm. Like I don't know who his 3 opponents are besides Chris, but I think that they're probably not like Eric's 80% to play Storm because he just won a big tournament with Storm. He just went 2-1 with Storm, but he's also has a wide range. He's played Dredge, he's played Workshops,
right?
He's also played like a Landstill control deck when he beat me when I was playing Shops. So I could see him running a whole wide variety of decks.
Eric's other opponents are Ochoa and me.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There's no way you run Storm into Pikula Ochoa, right?
Well,
that's just crazy.
Unless you think Ochoa is gonna, pivot, in which case running Storm might make some more sense because most of the decks that are good against shops are soft to Storm, right? Like if you look at a deck like Landstill or like Oath of Druids, those decks tend not to be great against Storm. Not that any deck is can't beat other decks, but those decks are sacrificing some speed. And the Storm deck, one of the reasons I think the deck is so good right now is it beats up on slow decks so well because the combination of Defense Grid and something like 6 or 7 Duresses makes all the control decks kind of a joke. Like if they're not killing you, then the Storm deck's just going to win. It's a far cry from old Storm decks or a deck like Belcher, for example. Belcher's kind of the other side of that, where Belcher's even faster, but if you can survive till turn 3 against Belcher with a blue deck, I'm usually feeling pretty good. It's not a done deal, but your draw steps are better than theirs. Storm is it's not really like that. They just have so much disruption.
No, that's fair. It's a good point. I mean, I know that ever since Mental Misstep, it feels like the Dark Ritual based combo has been not so good against Storm. I mean, Dark Ritual based combo has been not so good against blue decks, but I don't know, between Dark Petition and some of the super hosey stuff like Chalice leaving the format, maybe I think you might be onto something there. It does feel like this particular Storm deck is actually good against blue.
Yeah, I've had that experience.
I'll buy that. Oh, sounds like we have a match. So let's get down to match number 1. Welcome back. Randy Bueller, joined by Luis Scott Vargas. It is time for the unveiling of the new decks. Chris Pikula has shown up with Storm. Eric Froehlich has gone with the Workshops. So both players switched to the deck the other guy played last week.
They traded decks. That's awesome.
Hilarious. Interesting. So this has got to be bad for Chris, right?
Well, it's going to depend on the particular shops build. Like, for example, if you look at David Ochoa's Sphereless shops build, where he just forgot to play the card Sphere Resistance, then that got a bit better for Storm. But in general, Storm would rather not see the card Bishop's Workshop. It's certainly not what it's hoping to see.
Yeah, and Eric clearly, I see a smokestack in his hand. So, I mean, he is not on aggro shops. Between the title of the deck and the smokestack that's in his hand, he's definitely on something a little more grindy. That Null Rod is
though Eternal and Null Rod's pretty tempting here. He could Ghost Core the library. He could also play Sphere of Resistance. So Eric drew a Sphere, and he gets to play one card this turn. He gets between his Mox Jet. I expect him to play a 2-mana artifact, and I actually would rather just play Sphere on turn 1, and you can still follow it up with Null Rod on turn 2.
Sure.
Chris really needs to draw lands here.
Yeah, Eric wants wants the mana from his Mox Jet in the short term.
Right. Well, it's kind of 6 one way, a half dozen the other, because either he plays a Null Rod that costs 3 mana, or he plays a Sphere that costs 2 but doesn't have a Mox. So, but for the time being, yes, Eric would rather have the mana from Null Rod.
It's interesting how Chris is kind of disguised. We know he's on Storm because our graphics people have told us, but Eric off isn't going to necessarily come to that conclusion off a turn 1 library.
No, and one of the reasons to play Sphere here is demonstrated by what's about to happen. It's Chris is going to go Mox into potentially like a Lotus Petal or something like that. I guess he just played the Mox Jet, and then Eric can play Null Rod to shut down those artifacts. Eric drew another Sphere though, so he has the option of just playing another Sphere, which sounds pretty good. He won't be able to play Null Rod the turn after that though, unless he draws a land. Oh, Chris of course didn't play the Lotus Petal because he wants to keep library going. Right. So Chris just needs to hit lands. It's like a 13 to 14 land deck usually, and if he doesn't keep drawing lands, then it gets a little tougher. But if he can probe into a land and hit a land drop here, that's pretty good. Especially since Ghost Quarter, which is an interesting inclusion, that's not a Wasteland or a Strip Mine. That's a lot worse when your opponent can get a basic, and the Storm decks typically play one basic. So it's kind of an interesting interplay here, library versus Eric playing lock pieces. It's not as good for library as you might think. Once enough lock pieces come down, Chris can draw a bunch of extra cards and still lose the game.
2 mana Lotus Petal.
Oh, that was a great draw for Eric. He drew an Ancient Tomb. Unfortunately for him, he still can't cast Lodestone Golem because Sphere Resistance is not Thorn of Amethyst. But if he wants, he can cast Null Rod to shut off 2 of Chris's mana here. The disadvantage of Null Rod is it does stop Eric's Mox Jet, but it still seems like it's safer to cast that than not.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's got 4 mana, even without the Jet. He drops Chris down to 2, one of which he doesn't particularly want to tap for colorless mana. He'd rather be drawing cards with.
It's a tough decision here whether you kill the Library of Alexandria or not. Because if you don't, then Chris keeps hitting land drops. But if you do, Chris gets a basic, and now you can't cast Lodestone Golem unless you draw Mitchell's Workshop. Whereas right now, Eric's leaving the door open for drawing Ancient Tomb.
Chris did find a land, the Badlands.
So he's running multiple copies of Badlands. That's interesting, because not all decks do that either. Unless I saw it twice or something.
I think you may have seen it
Oh,
twice.
okay. Yeah, that would have surprised me. But sometimes there's a slight lag between our hand cam and our. Yeah, okay. I guess that
Yeah,
is.
and Skype not doing us any favors this evening. We keep losing the picture.
All I know is I saw two Badlands on my screen, but they were the same one. It was time traveling. See, this is interesting too. Eric to another sphere. His Lodestone Golem is getting harder and harder to cast, but Bazaar of Baghdad's kind of good here. There's so many cards Eric doesn't care about playing or can't play that the Bazaar can help him churn through those cards. I wonder if he's got Uba Mask somewhere in his deck. So right now, Chris can't cast a spell.
He must. You don't play Bazaar of Baghdad in a workshop deck without Uba Mask. There's no way he doesn't have Uba Mask.
Right. I was going to say, can't cast a spell unless it's Gitaxian Probe, which means he can't use Library. Eric revealing a hand of kind of medium news for Chris. They're two uncastables, but on the other hand, Lodestone Golem will get well on its way to ending the game here. And yeah, I agree that if Eric's got Bazaar in his hand, it's highly likely that he's got Uba Mask. So he chose not to use Bazaar end of turn here.
He likes his cards.
Bazaar is fairly punishing if you don't have a Uba Mask, or at the very least a Crucible. But I would expect Eric to use it now, because if he draws Mitchell's Workshop, the reward is very high.
Ancient Tomb. It's making progress.
It's close. So I guess I expect Eric here to keep Ancient Tomb Lodestone Golem. He could go that direction. He could potentially just keep Mishra's Factory and Ancient Tomb, and then you can start attacking with Factory while Ghost Quartering Chris here, and then that is a different kind of clock. But if you keep Ancient Tomb Lodestone Golem, all you need to do is draw any land on your next turn that isn't like a Bazaar or like a Tabernacle or whatever it is.
Has Eric played a card yet that wasn't in your deck last week? Is he just on your deck?
He's got main deck Ghost Quarters. That's not typical.
That's not what you had last set?
I didn't. I had one on the sideboard. I didn't have it in the main deck, though.
He did keep Ancient Tomb Lodestone. So not exactly the list you have. Chris's list, at this point, Eric must put him on Storm, right? He's seen a Badlands. He's seen a
Dark
Lotus
Petition.
Petal. Well, now Dark Petition's been discarded. Fine. He's officially up. But I mean, just the Lotus Petal is telling you that they want to accelerate quickly. I mean, and at that point, and obviously Eric knows the Dark Petition Storm deck super well. Chris probably just has Eric's list.
All right, so Eric drew a Black Lotus here. Not any good with Norrod in play. So he's going to wait on using Bazaar, because when you have two cards, Bazaaring just knocks you down to one card. Like, it's not a card advantage machine. So, but next turn it's going to get a use off. So that's still a fairly powerful effect for just a land. But again, you'd want a card to combine with it. Otherwise, it's just kind of giving you card selection at a very steep price. Pretty funny that these two apparently just switched decks. And, well, there you see a lot of cards you want to see. Crucible, in particular, lets Eric keep Lodestone Crucible, can play Crucible here, having not played a land. Yeah, this is really bad for Chris. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, he needs to tap out exactly. Well, it's still bad for Chris, because this means that Eric gets to replay Factory, but next turn he can just go Ghost Quarter, replay Ghost Quarter, Ghost Quarter, and that might lock Chris up completely.
It seems like it'll prompt a concession.
Because Chris can have maybe two basics at most, one of each, Island Swamp. Even if he's got two basics, getting Ghost Quarter 3 times sets him back one land. And Chris is already... His win condition here is to get up to 5 mana to cast Hurkyl's Recall, and he doesn't have the Hurkyl's Recall, and he's only at 4 mana. This will knock him to 3, and then from then on, he gets Ghost Quartered every turn. So I don't even think this Lodestone Golem is going to impact the outcome of the game. So yeah, Eric's next turn is going to involve 3/4, not the full amount.
It's a 75-cent turn.
Something like that. Well,
We're kind of assuming Chris has a main deck Hercules Recall. Most of these decks would have one.
yes, that is very. Man, Eric played 2 last week, so if Chris was playing the same list, then Eric would be. Then he'd be on 2. Even if you're not playing that, like you can't just be dead to any deck that casts Mishra's Workshop or plays a Mishra's Workshop.
Yeah. There is the concession. And now we go to sideboarding. Maybe get a closer look at these decks. Chris says,
Chris looks like
I
he's
don't
on
need defense grids.
Storm. Eric's deck does not look particularly different from what I played last week.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure it depends on Ghost Corps. He changed something. I'm sure he made some adjustments there. I mean, you see like a worm coil engine or whatever, but otherwise it looks fairly similar.
So sideboarding here helps who?
It's funny. It depends actually on the lists substantially. Generally, it helps the Storm deck because the Storm deck gets decided more basic lands and gets decided more bounce spells. So that's definitely point Storm. Overall, I would expect it to help Storm more. It is funny that depending on the list of workshops you're on, you sideboarding can actually be better than normal because if Eric's playing something similar to what I played last week, he's only got 2 Thorn of Amethyst in the main deck, and he's got 2 in the sideboard. You're kind of cheating on spheres a little bit. And you have cards like Ensnaring Bridge, which are not particularly useful. So
it's a bold statement. You don't like Ensnaring Bridge against Storm.
Well, it stops Empty the Warrens if you get to 0 cards.
You're right.
The problem was if you can't get to 0 cards, then it still doesn't do anything. So
Chris many Elmods.
Well, Chris is on a great opening hand. He gets to Time Twister with a black mana floating and a Sacrifice of Lines item.
Oh yeah.
So he gets to Time Twister with black, blue, blue, blue floating, which is exactly what you want on the play.
What a great hand. Yeah, land, pedal, Dark Ritual, play the Lion's Eye, cast the Time Twister, sack the Lion's Eye as a response. And he may as well get Probe first to see if he draws any more fast mana.
Someone in the chat asked if it was an advantage that we get to see these decks and stuff. We only see the decks of the matches we commentate on. We don't know what our opponents are going to play. So right. I'm gonna play against Rich next round and be completely blind on what he's playing, and same for him, vice versa. And then after this week, the deck lists are all public. So
yeah, I do now see what I'll be up against when I play Eric in a couple of weeks. But
right,
that's probably more of a distraction than anything else.
So Eric did keep this 5-card hand. I couldn't tell if he had Leyline of Sanctity or not, but if he did, then one of the reasons to mulligan a little bit more aggressive than normal is you're on the draw, and you can do nothing on turn 1 against a deck that frequently does something on turn 1. So
Chris found a ritual off that Git Probe. It's only +1, but still, you'd rather have multiple black mana floating and the 3 blue. Chris should win from here. This should be a first turn kill.
It's likely to be a first turn kill. It's not a guarantee, though.
I'm saying it's above 50%.
Yeah, that sounds right. Which means, there's still a decent percentage of you failing. Because even, depending on the hand, Dark Petition might not be a win.
All right. Hold control. Do not yield priority when you cast this Time Twister. Sack the Lion's Eye as a response. 5 mana floating and a fresh grip of 7. Does have a Dark Petition.
So that's not a turn 1 kill. It can't be.
He can Dark Petition for Lotus for bargain if he wants to keep going.
No, because he doesn't have any spells in his graveyard. He Time Twister.
So of course.
That's the reason I was saying it wasn't huge percentage, because Dark Petition needs a ritual.
No spell mastery.
Right. What Chris can do is play. Eric found the ley line now. What Chris can do is play Necropotence and Necro for a bunch with 2 bounce spells in hand, which...
Where does the 3rd black for Necropotence come from?
Oh, you can Dark Petition
Dark
for
Petition
Lotus.
For Lotus.
Right.
And then so you use your Dark Petition to get the Lotus? Okay.
I mean, it's that or do nothing. So I don't think that he's gonna.
And he
Uh,
does have Hercules, so he's got to feel decent about his
yeah,
ability
he's
to.
also drawing a bunch of cards. Also, Ifru got a random 7 here, which is no guarantee of being good. And in fact, Ifro's hand is kind of medium. If he draws a workshop, if Ifro goes workshop Trinisphere, then Chris, by definition, has to go land go. Unless he has Ancient Tomb off the Necros. That's not even 100% true. And then Ifro can go Wasteland, Strip Mine, and maybe get out of it. But I would expect Chris to Necro for a fair amount. His life total's not under pressure, and what he does his next turn is pretty important. If Eric can draw, yeah, Mishra's Workshop or Black Lotus are the two big draws for him, or Mana Crypt potentially.
How many do you set aside here of your Chris?
I would be tempted to set aside in the range of like 10 to 12, but
How about 4? I was
well,
going to say 5 or 6. 10 is super aggressive.
well, it's not unreasonable. Like that's the thing. Necro's really hard card to play, and I rarely know when I'm doing it correctly. So I'm not saying I'm 100% correct, but I really want to make sure that you can set up a good turn next turn. The problem is if Eric has a good turn next turn and plays like a lock piece, and then you have to wait an additional turn, and then he plays another one, it gets really, really tricky. And so I really want to find like some combination of like Ancient Tomb or rituals, that sort of thing, to make sure I can do something. Necron for 4 is good incrementally. You've got a bargain you can discard and fetch lands. Those tend to be discarded pretty quickly. So
I
I
mean,
don't know.
the case for necroing for fewer cards is that you may need to build up lands to build up to a Hercules.
Lengo. So upon further reflection, maybe I wouldn't do 10 or 12, but I would probably do like at least 6 to 8. I think I'd go a little bit more aggressive than 4. I don't think you need to like turbo necro and do it for like 13, and I don't think, or 14 or whatever. But I don't think you need to like necro for 3 or 4. That's usually something I find myself doing against a blue deck.
Yeah, all fair.
Though this is going to work out, I think, pretty well for Chris because Eric does have a slow hand, and if Eric's turn is just like, if let's say Eric draws a blank, Wasteland Go that plays into Chris's necro 4.
He can destroy a land for 4 turns in a row. And
Yeah.
probably will. I mean, depending on if he gets that many turns.
Chris
he draws acceleration.
Yeah, Chris in the awkward spot of wanting to play Mana Crypt. Like if it was a Mox, you would for sure slam it because you want to get it out from under spheres and whatnot. But it's Mana Crypt and you have a Necro in play, so that's like pretty bad for you.
He does play it.
Well, Chris also found Soul Ring and Lion's Eye Diamond, so that again he's more apt to like play some, just getting some artifacts into play. But he didn't.
Yeah, that's all.
Oh, right, that's off the Necro. So he didn't do anything else. One of the reasons to play Mana Crypt is to, if Eric goes land like normal sphere, like Sphere of Resistance, you can Hercules Recall. Though Chris is not at going off next turn either, which is funny. He did not find any Dark Rituals, so Chris doesn't have the double black for Dark Petition yet because he played Island this turn.
Made sense to play a basic, right? You want to play around the Wasteland.
For sure. This actually is kind of working out well for Ifro. That Mana Crypt is going to really just punish Chris every turn. I'm not saying Chris shouldn't have played it because Necro actually gives you an advantage to playing out cards you have to discard less, and to play Hercules or Chain end of turn is very powerful. But because Ifro's not doing anything, they just keep taking turns. Mana Crypt in play makes that a lot worse for Chris than it would be otherwise. So I agree with Chris's decision to play it because you can presumably bounce something end of turn. But just the way it turned out, Ifro just is on all Wastelands.
Which Chris is going to start getting a little frustrated by when this Badlands disappears.
Well, yeah, if Chris... I mean, he doesn't have Black Lotus to draw anymore. He doesn't have that much, like... what can he Necro into that... And it looks like he did win the flip. What can he Necro into that... He needs to Necro into, like... Because this Badlands is going to go. He needs to Necro into, like, a Dark Ritual and a Black Land, or a Dark Ritual and a Lotus Petal so he can play his Academy. Which, he's got a lot of those in his deck. I think Chris is still a favorite to win this game. But it's closer than, he might have wanted, given that he Time Twisted with 5 mana floating.
Well, the Jet helps.
Yeah, Jet's really big, because that means that Chris doesn't need a ritual if he finds a black land here, in which he found a polluted delta, which you don't love keeping fetches, but In this
Yeah.
particular case, I think they're going to do it. This actually looks like enough to win if Eric doesn't find it doesn't find a workshop. He's just going to keep wastelanding. He's got. I mean, he could play Ancient Tomb and hope to play a Trinisphere next turn, but it feels like his chances of winning are greater if he just wastelands here.
I agree. I would wasteland.
Basically, that's the only disruptive element he has.
I mean, the fact that he keeps Chris off black mana too means Chris has to choose whether he wants double black mana or a Tolarian Academy that taps for 5.
Well, right now, Chris can go Mox, Delta, Dark Petition for Yawgmoth's Will, sack Lion's Eye Diamond. Presumably that's enough. Yeah, that should be.
Yeah, the Lotus is in his yard too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that sounds like it's
I think Chris does end up winning this.
That sounds right. Assuming there's a lane to get with the Delta. Should still be.
Yeah. The deck plays 4 Underground Seas and a Swamp, so if not 2 after board. So
Yeah, I'm with you. Polluted Delta, Jet, that's double black. He can Dark Petition for Yawgmoth's Will. He won't have a ton floating.
he can also
He
get
should have enough.
Actually, Kai pointed out that he can also get double black off of Jet, Mox, Academy,
Hercules myself.
Yeah.
Oh, Hercules myself might actually be better. With Chendrils already in his hand, does he even need?
Well,
Like his hand is pretty close to lethal without the Dark Petition.
He needs to cast the Dark Petition. Even if he Hercules, he's at like 9 Storm if he has Hercules. But it's still. I mean, Chris has got a bunch of different paths to win this game. He technically has to worry about a card like Mindbreak Trap, but that's not a very popular card in the workshop decks right now. I think Leyline of Sanctity has replaced Mindbreak Trap in that spot because I like the idea. You want a card that interacts when you're on the draw because like a game like this, a lot of what Ifra has just doesn't do anything on the draw, but Leyline does that. Leyline frequently buys you at least a turn, if not more. I actually played this matchup 2 weeks ago when I was in Ifro's place and Ifro was in Chris's place. I was playing the Shops deck against Storm, and game 2 or game 3 I opened on Leyline plus turn 1 lock piece on the draw, and that was good enough.
Right. Yeah, I like the Leyline tech too. I think it is. It's not game winning all by itself, but it's at least going to force them to deal with it, and that often is all you need.
Oh yeah, the chat does point out. Kronos says you can't actually crack LED with Leyline in play if you have a Necro in play, but Chris also could just empty the Warrens for a million here if he wanted to. Not you'd. I mean, he's got a Mana Crypt, but assuming he's bouncing it, obviously he's just going to Tendrils for the win. He can set that up already. I mean, he's got a couple different paths to it, but I think Chris is just like triple checking his math.
Yeah, the Yawgmoth's Will without being able to sack Lion's Eye because you can't let your Tendrils of Agony get removed from the game by Necropotence makes the obvious Yawgmoth's Will line is sketchy.
I think still good enough though because he's got a Black Lotus in his graveyard.
I think it's good enough. You can just also Dark Petition for any one spell though, and then Hercules yourself.
So it looks like Chris is going to go the play Delta route.
Okay, so he's not Herculesing himself with Academy mana.
Yeah, but he's got enough mana that assuming he can get enough spells, he can Yawg Will for the win. So to make sure not to sack Lion's Eye Diamond here.
Right. Sacrificing Lion's Eye Diamond loses the game. Oh god, he did it. Well, he sacrificed his Lion's Eye Diamond.
It doesn't lose him the game. He just has to now set up and empty the Warren's kill.
It exiles the Tendrils of Agony. That's bad. It also exiles the Hercules Recall, which could bounce the Mana Crypt. Now he can lose to his own Mana Crypt next turn if he's trying to kill with empty the Warrens.
Eric's on 50-50 here.
Right,
that's not 100% true. Chris does have Time Twister in his graveyard, so what Chris can do is I haven't looked at how much mana. He can play a bunch of mana play Dark Petition, play Empty the Warrens, and then Time Twister and hope to draw another Hurkyl's Recall. Which I mean, he's presumably got multiple bounce spells in his deck.
Interesting. Okay. Any chance he plays a second Tendrils?
No, not really. That doesn't. I mean, I guess can't rule it out. I don't know what his list is, but I can't imagine he does.
All right, so Yawgmoth's Will is in effect, but Chris has exiled what we presume is his only copy of Tendrils of Agony, so he can't just Stormkill here.
Well, yeah, and for those wondering about Time Walk's actually not relevant here at all. The only thing Eric has going for him is that Mana Crypt and the coin flip that results from it. So
yeah. Chris would happen on a Time Walk turn.
Chris can Time Walk, it's just still 50-50. So I accept your proposition that Chris is about 50% to lose this game. He's actually got to be less than that because he's got outs to find answers here, as well as the fact that he could just win the coin flip.
He is now obliged to go get his Empty the Warrens. I can't imagine he's got any other victory condition in his deck. We did see him sideboard in the Empty the Warrens, so at least he's got that going for him. It's funny, I talked to Chris a little bit coming into this week. He told me he was thinking about playing Storm, and I mean, we don't play each other, so there's no information that affected me, but he admitted he's never played a competitive game with this deck. Like, right. This is match number 1 for Chris with a Storm deck in his hands. Well, with a recent Storm deck in his hands.
And
yeah,
I was just gonna say that Chris. This is why I didn't put Chris on Storm, because he had said that exact same thing. I have no knowledge of Chris's Storm playing history, but he himself said, I've never played Storm before. I don't know if I can figure out Storm, so I thought maybe he wouldn't try it then.
He may be wishing he thought the same thing right about now. I don't know. Or more because he got the Workshops matchup than. So he Dark Petitioned for Hurkyl's to pick up his Mana Crypt. Does he have enough? There's a second Dark Petition in there, or no?
I think
he's just gonna Twister.
No, he's got the second Dark Petition, so he's got enough mana to do all this.
Oh, there is a Dark Petition. Okay.
Yeah, because Hurkyl's provides a bunch of mana, so he gets there.
So he Dark Petitions for Hurkyl's Recall, picks up all his artifacts. May as well do that one first so that you have more Storm count for this Empty the Warrens. There's the second Dark Petition. Here is what he hopes is a lethal number of goblins.
It is, unless Eric has something like the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which I was playing last week.
Ensnaring Bridge is also a thing that could hypothetically happen, but not from Eric's hand.
No. I guess if Eric had 3 more mana sources and playing a Bazaar, maybe, but this is going to be difficult.
Right. So Chris gets there. Remove your Tendrils of Agony from the game, no problem. And you know what? He may have actually seen that whole line. I'm not sure why you would go through that, but he went in the tank for a while, and then he didn't really pause at the point where he sacked the Lion's Eye Diamond.
No, he had a plan. I do think that Kai's initial line, which a lot of other people I'm sure got to also, was a little better, of Hurkyl's yourself a bunch to generate the double black with Academy, and then just Dark Petition, and then just Tendrils for lethal. You don't have to even cast Yawgmoth's Will or anything like that. Because it gets you to 9 Storm ready. You can Dark Petition for literally anything.
Yep. Eric was comfortable with his plan. Submitted his deck in pretty quickly. Chris is lining things up.
The Workshop deck also, this is a matchup where neither player really has a ton of room to move once you figure out your board plan. It's not like Blue Mirrors where being on the play or the draw really just impacts how you sideboard. In the Workshop versus Storm matchup, it's like you've got cards that are great and cards that are useless, and you just swap them out.
So what does Eric get to do to him?
Everything. I mean, this is the turn 1 Lodestone Golem, turn 2 Nullrod Wasteland, which is basically the optimal draw.
And there's a Crucible.
Yeah. It's going to be tough. I mean, Chris Chris gets to play turn 1 Ancestral, because I'm assuming Ephro is going to lead on Lodestone, but then Chris can't do a ton more than that unless he finds like a lot off his Ancestral, and then Eric's going to go Norod Wasteland and just like go a long way towards locking Chris out. Chris does have Chain of Vapor here, but
Yep.
it still seems really hard to justify not playing Ancestral, even though it doesn't.
You can wait.
Yeah. The advantage to playing it on turn 1 is that you get to replay any artifacts. But I guess against a Lodestone, there's really not much that like you're not going to go off. Like if you draw Lotus and something else, maybe, but.
Right.
So Chris has to commit now to casting Chain of Vapor if that's what he wants to cast. But the problem is Eric's just going to replay his Lodestone Golem. So from Chris's side, you don't love this position, but I think you cast Ancestral.
Right. You might chain Lodestone during end step, but you can't do it main phase.
Right. And that's why Eric. That's why Eric went ahead and did it pre-combat. He might be missing out on the attack. But the problem from Eric's perspective is if he doesn't, and this is where Norod's just brutal, by the way. Look, Chris has 2 more pieces of artifact mana in his hand. If Eric attacked first, what Eric could do is play Wasteland and then attack, and then during combat, after damage, Wasteland Chris's land, and then force Chris to commit at that point. You don't want to Wasteland during your second main phase, or Chris can float mana, and if you play anything, he bounces in response.
Sure.
But this might just be the lock. I think it is. I think
the Crucible's insane.
Yeah, just Crucible. I mean, Chris doesn't even have that many lands. Right now, he has as many lands as Ephro has strip effects, but Lodestone Golem plus Norod plus Crucible plus Wasteland is pretty obscene. Also, actually, Eric drew Sphere of Resistance. So this is, I think this is just over. I actually don't think that there's any cards that Chris can use to get out of this.
Chris's hand was pretty good if he was on the play.
Yeah, that's the story of this matchup.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric got to win game 1, which means he got game 3 on the draw, which means his Golem into Norod was just more than enough to win the game.
Yeah, this is what you fear when you show up with the Storm deck. Workshop can do some pretty nasty things to you.
And Chris and Eric can now either play. I guess he can't play Crucible and replay a land, so he's just going to play, presumably play a Thorn of Amethyst here. But.
Yeah, Chris has seen plenty. So Eric Froehlich gets to 3-1. Chris's initial experiment with the Dark Petition Storm deck, unsuccessful. He'll be 1-3 headed into next week. Interesting. So nothing shocking from these players, but always interesting to see what they choose to play. I don't know. It feels like we had both these decks solidly in their ranges, but
neither of them were the deck I expected that player to play. Like, I had Chris on either Shops or Storm to some degree.
With Shops more likely?
Like, well, it was like this, like, if you look at a progress bar, it's like mostly Shops, some Storm, and then a little bit of like, who knows?
Right.
Eric has a lot more entries on that bar, but Workshop was definitely not one of the bigger ones.
I'll buy that. All right, well, that's going to do it for round number 1. We are going to take a quick break. We will be back with new commentators and a new match for you guys. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
With Hookah Trade, the world is your trade binder.